How you doing, man?
Good.
I looked at my notes. We last spoke on the 30th of March, which, like, I think just the mindset back then was just so wildly different in terms of,
Yeah,
what we thought quarantine was going to be.
yeah, we're living in a different world.
Totally. It's like, I mean, it's been fascinating in some ways of just seeing what an accelerant for change this time is, and like how we're so not used to that, but how things on a 2 to 3 week basis can change in a way that maybe might have taken years before. I mean, I'm curious from your point of view, like how have you seen? Obviously, I want to talk about kind of what's going on very much currently, but I think in just terms of quarantine and the corona pandemic situation, like how have you seen things change?
Say that one more time.
Like how have you seen things change as far as the pandemic since we last spoke on, the end of March?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the primary thing is that we know a lot more at that point. There had not been too much work done domestically to understand what was happening. And there was a lot of problematic and conflicting data coming from abroad. Uh, and I think we we got to get more data coming from like U.S. counties about the virus itself, and uh, we also got to see how our institutions responded variously, and I think that's probably even that's a bigger kind of story for history maybe than the virus itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like since the end of, I guess, April, like starting May, the virus became a local problem, like, and not, which is interesting because obviously we're an incredibly like different country in terms of the makeup of each state, from a density standpoint, from a socioeconomic standpoint, from a housing and cultural standpoint, and um, not that we don't need a federal response, because that's also important in a lot of ways. It's interesting to see how now it's almost every state or region is kind of on its own to figure out. And I think it's interesting to see. I wonder what kind of long-term effects that has on like thinking more locally in general in our day-to-day lives. And that's obviously something that like you're involved in as well. So I'm curious, just in terms of local communities, like what this moment has meant for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a moment of, at least in the United States, general kind of devolution where, all the way down to the individual level, people are awakening to the fact that they actually can't rely on these institutions to provide for them, to protect them, to inform them accurately. I think great examples are some of the flip-flops in policy that we saw not only from American institutions but from the World Health Organization around things like masks, and the fact that if you are dependent on some of these big systems in particular ways, now is definitely a wake-up call. So in the case of the CryptoCastle, we tried to get very much ahead of what was happening and tried to work toward actually kind of building a self-reliant house where we grow the food that we need here, where we have decentralized internet up and running, where we produce the energy that we consume in the house here. That's super challenging though, and I think there have been forces that have shaped American society at least to not be conducive to that sort of thing. And I think as people start to see the faults in the institutions, the centralized institutions that we've come to depend on, there's going to be a big swing in the other direction. So we also organize the neighborhood around the CryptoCastle, the crypto hood. And we try to, work as kind of like servant leaders in terms of um, uh, helping people, one, act as a community, but then also to uh, to get a better understanding of the resources that are internal, rather than having to be dependent on importing everything we need. uh, it's super challenging, but I think it's definitely the move. um, and I think this is the kind of thinking that's happening broadly across the country.
Yeah, no,
And
it's interesting. Like I remember when we first spoke, you sent me articles about, you know, talking about our food shortages and certain products is going to be hard to get our hands on during the pandemic, and it seems like such a far-fetched thought. And obviously, like I'm still in New York, like in an effort to stay out of the stores, I've been doing Whole Foods delivery, and the idea that like certain stuff doesn't come all the time because it's not available, it's such a foreign concept to us as Americans, but also one that's like I think most of the world kind of deals with that on some level. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about that radical shift in the other direction, because I think here we're just so accustomed to this preponderance of choice and feeding into the system of just relying on the institutions that we're accustomed to. It's
yeah,
it was interesting. I feel like in the food arena, at least in the city, it's like stabilized a bit. I'm not experiencing as much like shortages of certain things, but for a moment it was very interesting and like brought up a lot of questions. I'm like about, if we become so reliant on Whole Foods to deliver our groceries, all our food's going to taste the same in a mass produced way that, maybe we feel good about because it got delivered to our door. But beyond that, I wonder.
yeah, for sure. So we saw some shortages here. I particularly noticed the repeated shortage of eggs. But it seems like things have kind of plateaued. There are still empty shelves here and there. Even still those surprising products like toilet paper.
Yeah.
And paper towel. But I think it's still unclear, what the medium term and long term prospects really are, because there's so many variables at play right now. And it's not just the virus and the shutdowns as a result of the virus. There was also a broad economic collapse.
Yeah, absolutely.
We still don't know what the impacts of that are going to be. And on top of that, we're living through essentially a constitutional crisis in this country, where you have different components of the government kind of not working in that checks and balances form, but starting to kind of undermine each other. And I think people, the way they conceptualize constitutional crises is that they happen real fast. It's like the dramatized TV version where it has to happen within 42 minutes. But in fact, these things play out over months. And I think it's very obvious at this point that we're in this situation, but people haven't thought about being prepared. We're at this point many weeks away, but that time will fly, many weeks away from the general election in this country. And it's certainly clear that it's not going to be anything like a normal election. And it probably also is safe to say that it's not going to be free and fair. I think already there are so many flaws, and maybe we're poignantly aware of it because of 2016, with Trump not being actually elected by the majority of the populace, being more so selected by the electoral college system. That that process is sort of critically flawed vis-a-vis like the will of the people. But this time is going to be special for a lot of other reasons.
Yeah.
I think the number of U.S. primaries that were derailed, and the sort of ongoing kind of, it's not quite a collapse yet, but when you have, defense secretaries saying the president is undermining the Constitution and the president is egging on rebels who are ready to topple U.S. state governments. Like it's a situation that is, like, at least to me, poignantly obviously on the brink. And I think everyone should be taking action to be prepared and not to be dependent on these big centralized systems and institutions.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there that you said that I want to talk about. The one thing before I forget is, it's interesting you brought up, like, I feel like we've kind of not glazed over, but at least the media narrative to a certain degree is kind of looking beyond the current economic situation as if, things will get better. And I mean, the jobs report today was like horrific. And I think, the toll of whatever the economic impact is like is still very unclear. But I think it's fascinating, and I'm curious from your point of view in the crypto community of the fact that the traditional economic markets are skyrocketing. Like, certain stocks have hit their all-time highs right now, and it's obviously thinking beyond the crisis, but we're very much in it, as you said. And I'm curious, from a crypto point of view, of like, how do you kind of reconcile how out of touch it seems the current markets are with the actual what's going on, for common people?
Yeah, you're saying, like, how do we reconcile what's happening with crypto markets versus?
No, well, I'm curious. Like, I don't on a day-to-day level keep track of the crypto markets, but I think from a Nasdaq, Dow Jones, like the traditional markets are just going straight up and up and up over the last 2 months, and it's hard to wrap your head around because of how bad things actually are.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious, like, your point of view coming from somebody who kind of operates outside of the traditional economics of things, like how your take on that.
Yeah, so I think in terms of like traditional equity markets, that's driven by money printing. It's driven by the creation of money through the banking system, primarily the Federal Reserve, but not only the Federal Reserve. And when in a single day, the Fed creates $5 trillion, that money flows through the economy, but the spigot, right, is at Wall Street. And a lot of that money then goes into equities and drives up equities when there's no real increase in productivity or value. So there's the numerical increase because there's more and more money chasing a finite number of shares, a finite number of goods, resources, and services that can be provided in the economy. And when you have more and more money chasing that finite amount of things, that drives prices up. And we're just seeing the beginning of it, I would estimate, guess.
Right, because a lot of that, like, it's all fine and well when that just exists in the stock market, and it's a function of the wealthy to get wealthier. But then when that sense of inflation trickles down to food prices, housing prices, everything that kind of affects everybody regardless of your economic status, it's a scary thought in so many ways.
Yeah, for sure. I think we tend to see it flow through the economy in a particular way, and I think that has a lot to do with structurally it's created by the banking system, and it flows through finance first, and then into, the rest of the economy. And then finally, after it's flown through most of the economy and driven up the price level, then it kind of ends up in the hands of like average people. So they get it after the inflation.
Right.
And that's also what's kind of fundamentally, one of the things that's fundamentally unfair about this system.
And so I guess kind of a corollary to that question is how, I guess, in the crypto community right now, like where is your, like what have been the developments in just terms of like how those economics are functioning, like and where they're kind of maybe filling the blanks in the gaps of institutionalized systems, or where they've had to evolve?
Yeah. So I think part of the reason why, crypto's performing well right now is that people kind of realize that it is, a technological answer to the real, ethical flaws of the existing system. And they understand that, at least for a core of people who are now crypto holders, they understand that it has properties that mean it will perform well under, ultimately under circumstances of collapse. And there are other factors like the halvening, which happened just a couple of weeks ago, where the amount of Bitcoin that is mined with every block gets cut in half. This happens every 4 years. And that reduction
Is that a like a self-regulation type of thing?
Yeah, so this is built into the protocol written by Satoshi, and it is automatic across the network, where blocks which at a certain height, which are mined, need to include within them that Coinbase transaction of a certain amount of Bitcoin, and now that value is half of what it was before, and that is actually how the supply of Bitcoin is controlled over time.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that reduction in supply, if you have a fixed supply, right, there's supposed to be a fixed amount of Bitcoin, and there's increasing demand, that means the price goes up over time. And so that's what we've seen so far. There are other factors, but I think, over the past decade, people really have gotten at least that basic understanding of, hey, this is a system that doesn't have a single point of failure. There's no head to cut off, and there are, all sorts of redundancies just baked in that aren't even on the plane of consideration for traditional systems.
So would you say, like, kind of the faith or the kind of enthusiasm around the crypto community is that it's kind of got up in this time? Is that a fair way of saying it, or is it?
I think it's sort of parallel to like the prepper community. It's kind of like we don't want to say we told you so, but we told you so. And I think for many groups that are more prepared, it has been a long time coming. And I think if there were broader understanding of how, these new systems like Bitcoin really work, people would switch overnight. Like, if they really understood the fiat currency system, there's no way they would stand for it. It's just the fact that for most people, their day-to-day experience of the currency is so far removed from how it really internally works. And there's so much historical inertia with this system that people don't bother to inspect it, number one. And then in addition to that, a lot of the people who are most oppressed by these systems are robbed of their capacity to inspect it. So I think if there really was broader understanding of the new systems, people would switch overnight. and the dollar will probably be no more, or at best it would be like, you know, an old record player that we keep for antique purposes.
And how has it been just in your house in general? I know a few weeks ago you had an incident, but I'm hoping that like that incident got resolved and things are like looking better, I guess.
Yeah. So you probably saw what happened subsequently. And yeah, so I wouldn't say yeah, I mean, I think it's a part of a broader problem, so it's hard to say that it's resolved just
Yeah,
because
no, totally. I meant just in
um,
terms of like your day-to-day experience, because
yeah,
what we had spoken
those guys,
about in March sounded like it was not a
yeah,
tenable
so
situation.
yeah, so those guys are gone now. They actually tried to come back and break into the house, believe it or not.
When?
And
How long ago?
this was like a weekend, like 2 weeks ago.
And how long after was this that you kicked them out?
I think that was that must have been, it was Erev Pesach. I don't know the Gregorian calendar date. But you know, like to your question about it being resolved, it's a part of a bigger problem. And um, a couple weeks before this, I had like 3 friends say something to me about their living situations and having similar problems. And like, I remember like my response was one of like concern, but I didn't actually like do anything. And so each of those people actually ended up moving because of the situation they were in. They were facing like anti-Semitism in their actual home. And in hindsight, like, you know, when the situation initially exploded, I like reached out for help and people were very supportive. But at the same time, you know, there was kind of a like, you know, like a sort of like standoffishness or like a unsureness. So, I mean, like for me, it was a lot of like putting up with like dog whistles for a really long time that culminated with a guy taking a golf club to my Seder table. And so, you know, I think we're very often in this situation where we can sense that something is wrong, but it's not explicit, and we don't feel empowered to do something about it. And so, uh, literally, just in the first, you know, the couple weeks before this happened to me, 3 of my friends in San Francisco were describing situations that they were in. Each one of these people ended up moving. Um, So I decided to stand my ground. And yeah, I mean, I think I wish that in those situations, I wasn't, you know, the person on the other side saying, you know, well, maybe it's, you know, partially a personality issue, or maybe it can be like sorted out, or like, it's, you know, it's one thing when you know, someone's, you know, making dog whistles or making inappropriate jokes, but like I mean the trajectory was such that it ended up with this guy like threatening me and my roommate with a deadly weapon on holiday. And I, you know, I wish that there was some lesson that could be taken uh, for people to know to to respond more proactively to this sort of thing, because that's what I wish I had done. Um, but yeah, it's unfortunately a little bit too reflective of what's happening in this country right now. And I sure hope, we've all made the decision to be proactive about how we're responding to the threat that we're facing.
Yeah, no, that is a thing I've been talking about with other friends for the last week is the issues that we're having now are not new issues by any means. And it's just we've become acutely aware of how easy it is to look the other way or make excuses or even like not even understand our own implicit biases and acknowledging them. So I think everything you said about people trying to explain it away as personality or oh maybe he doesn't know Jews or like all these things that we especially as white people have like the luxury of looking the other way on. I think now like it's so clear that we need to like it's really easy to shout down big forms of hate and racism and it's a lot harder to identify but squashed in a meaningful way the smaller things that happen on a day-to-day basis and
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about here is like that's the challenge and that's not going to get fixed in a week or a month or whatever and so that's part that like I'm hopeful, but I'm also given what's going on, constitutionally, as you said, is like it's very scary at the same time because we're at this inflection point, and I just I'm curious like how you're trying to kind of wrap your head around both ways it could kind of go from here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stance should be, working for the best, but being prepared for the worst. And I think that means, working to be as the term I use, autarkic, where we produce what we need ourselves as much as of what we need ourselves as we can. But it also means like working on communal self-defense. Like that's a real thing. And it's not something that you want to end up needing and have, wasted the opportunity to prepare for it. I think, we're definitely teetering on the brink, but we can pull back. And we should be working, vociferously toward that. But it's not the sort of situation where we rly on everything just things just sort of working themselves out. Like we are responsible for our own lives and the condition of our society, and we certainly at the national level lack the leadership I think necessary to pull us back from the brink. So that means that everyone, man, woman, and child, kind of has to step up, or else. And it's not like the country hasn't been through internal struggles before, but I think the timing, the set of factors, the fact that there are fewer things perhaps holding Americans together than there have been in the past, all kind of indicate that like we should absolutely be prepared for the situation like deteriorating or getting worse, while at the same time working to fix the things that are broken, and working that in the best case scenario to come out of what's been happening way better, healthier, stronger as a society. But I think it really comes down to being prepared.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm struck by, especially throughout the pandemic, but especially right now, how I lost your video. Can I get you to
might be a little bit better.
Can I get you to tilt down the screen just a hair?
Yeah. How's that?
That's
okay.
Good. That's closer to how we had it before. No, I was saying it's the reactionary nature of everything going on right now is like it's so apparent and it's so what's getting in the way of like functional responses to what are serious issues. And I'm not sure how we get away from reactionary lines of thinking because it's plaguing us. But it's so obvious that that's like a crucial part of the issue right now. And I'm curious, as somebody who's always been thinking of the through the lens of being prepared, like how do you communicate that to everybody that they have to be able to be thinking ahead and not just kind of in the moment?
It's kind of hard. I reflect on like spending like close to a decade evangelizing Bitcoin to people, only to have them like completely ignore me, and then like after the fact say, wait, why didn't I buy Bitcoin? And I think that there's something that about human behavior that I don't understand, because it was sort of obvious to me what was happening. And I don't know what gets people to be kind of a little bit more future oriented or preparedness oriented um uh versus people who are not. Maybe it's something innate, or maybe it's something that has to do with upbringing. I think it's a tough problem though, in that maybe certain people in the society, in any population, for whatever reason, are they are the canaries, and whatever makes them the canaries, unfortunately can also make it more difficult for them to communicate with the masses. So it's almost this built-in human bias where en masse humans kind of tend to ignore the canaries. Um, Another good example is I attended protests in Oakland this week, and I was encouraging my friends to sign up for applications, which will allow us to continue to communicate despite if the government shut down the cellular networks and other networks. And the response that I get is kind of like, well, what is this app? What does it do? How does it work? So there's a lot of education that needs to happen in order to get people to understand even that, hey, they can just turn off all the phones. And then what will you do to prevent fascism from rising in your country? And there are a lot of those things which, if you're on the other side, if you're steeped in it, seem like basics, ABCs, fundamentals. Like, of course we need to have Bluetooth mesh messaging so that when they shut down the cellular networks, we can continue to communicate. How is that not obvious? But in fact, there's a huge educational burden, and there's a huge chasm between the people who have the know-how and the people who we need to get it to. And so I think a lot about these questions because I work in blockchain education. But I can't say I've found an easy solution. And while I have been able to onboard thousands and thousands of people, we're definitely still not there yet. We haven't achieved the vision, and it almost feels like we're after the alarm bell has rang. Like, a lot of what Bitcoin is actually about is about building systems that allow us to protect people, and allow us to empower people to protect themselves and each other. And it very much feels like we're 3 months behind where we're supposed to be as a movement. This is kind of dramatized in a book called Cryptonomicon, sort of like a fictionalized prehistory of the blockchain movement. A lot of people say it's a fictionalized account of David Shom, the sort of godfather of the cypherpunk movement, who came up with the idea for cryptocurrency in 1983 and then subsequently attempted to create a company DigiCash to actually create a cryptocurrency. The company failed, but Shroom became a legend, and obviously 2.5 decades later, Satoshi finally figured it out. But the motive of the character who's said to be Shroom, at least in the fictionalized version in Cryptonomicon, the novel, is actually working on creating this system, not just for anonymous internet banking, but as a data store that can't be taken down, so that he can distribute to people what are called Holocaust education and prevention pods. So they're a set of tools that allow people who are likely to be in genocide target populations to defend themselves. And so this book was published in 1999, if I remember correctly. And it's if anything deserves to be called it, it's like a fictionalized prehistory of the blockchain movement. So those motives have been a part of what's happening from before the beginning. And yeah, it's a practical problem to kind of try to push every day in the trenches to make things happen and to be progressing as fast as possible. Because, you know, if we are the people who can kind of see the future because we're closer to it, then there's some critical needs that we got to act on fast.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was talking to some friends the other day of like, and you brought it up before, like in the next, I guess, 5 months until the election, like truly anything is possible. And it's like, how do we just open our minds to like just accepting that, like our normal preconceptions about how an election should run and how, you know, politics should look like in the foreseeable future is like, where it's just not gonna, it's gonna be so different from expectations. And just instead of waiting for that to happen, you know, how to not capitalizing on it, but in a way hacking kind of the expectations of what's going to happen to do something that's meaningful. It seems more urgent than ever right now. And so, you know, I think, like, you know, you obviously have your world that you're digging into that. And like, as for myself, as somebody in advertising and entertainment, it's like, okay, where can I press people to just not accept business as usual in the status quo? But it feels like everybody has to be doing that on a widespread scale to kind of enact the type of change that I think most people want. It just requires us to kind of think outside the norm of how things normally get done. But that's like as you said, a huge undertaking without one clear answer of how to get there. But I'm hopeful and also scared of what the next 5 months holds in terms of, you know, the state of our government and civil society.
Yeah, so I sort of conceptualize it as like, you know, we need really a consciousness revolution. If you think about like the logical inconsistencies that we've, you know, not only had to sustain over the past 4 years, but, you know, over the past 400 years, when people wake up and decide to, you know, to reject those inconsistencies and embrace like truth, they actually rise to another consciousness level. We see this, you know, in a lot of different places. And I think there's something about the people in the society who are like most logical, who simply can't handle the cognitive dissonance that comes with accepting some of the things that en masse as a society we accept. And so I think having that awakening is related to waking up and saying, actually, the government isn't going to just take care of you. These institutions and the information that they provide can't just be trusted. And it doesn't matter if it's the World Health Organization or the CDC. They can be wrong, just like everyone else. And they can be wrong because they're making mistakes. They can also be wrong because they can be wielded as political instruments. And I think when people wake up to that and sort of rise to the consciousness level where they're they don't have this blockage, between them and thinking clearly, uh, that that we can see a lot of good things happen. That's when people can start to take action, where they no longer think, well, the government says this, so I can't do that. It's like, actually, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what is healthful and beneficial for you and for others, and this is what you should do. The fact that there's like some institution of whatever provenance, that's saying something that's the opposite, and it's false, shouldn't be able to shut down your cognitive process. And I think that's what really needs to happen. And when people, if it gets, categorically worse, hopefully we've had enough of a wake up call. But when things get worse, people are, forced to have that wake up moment. But unfortunately, historically, we know for a fact that it can happen too late. We know it can happen too late in a very large scale. You can have a situation where you have millions of people, marched to their death, and that happens, over the long term, as a part of a gradual process. So hopefully people have already passed the point where they're awake and they know that they need to, and they know that they need to take action, and they know they need to think for themselves. But I don't know. It's hard to say from my vantage point, because I'm here in a place where everyone's thinking about, how do we change the rules, and ship new and better rules every day. And I know that's not the norm for everyone else.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And it's interesting. I do have to run. I just realized, but always good to talk to you, Kinnard, and let's do it again soon. Okay.
Okay, great.
Hang in there. Stay safe. You know what to do.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Good to talk, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.